Welcome to Hitting Home with Mike and Arif. And this week on Rogers, we're thrilled to have a guest, a return guest, somebody who is sometimes referred to as your worship, but never at home. Deputy Mayor Barrie Ward. Welcome to the show, Barrie. Thanks for coming back.
Thanks for the invitation.
Absolutely. So, Barrie, I want to get right into it. What's the state of the city? How are we doing? It's COVID, it's 2020, it's been a crazy year, but how would you say we're doing?
I think the city, certainly financially, has done pretty well. I mean, we've managed to, thanks to our CAO, managed to cut enough costs that we should come out of it pretty well, along with money from the provincial government. It means at the end of the year, our budget shouldn't be too bad. Now, having said that, there's been a terrible impact on residents. Everything from, soccer in the summer, hockey now, recreation facilities. Certainly our theaters have suffered. So that kind of thing has certainly hurt. But I think financially, at least we're coming through it okay.
That's fantastic. I mean, and I think you're right. I mean, it is a matter of context. I really appreciate your tone and your tenor. Obviously, the city's finances may be okay and we may be able to recover, but certainly I think you're right on the money when you say that there really isn't a household that hasn't in some way, shape, or form been impacted. Now, Barrie, if I might, and correct me where I'm wrong, you've been doing this, you've been representing and serving the people of the city of Barrie for over 2 decades at this point, if I'm not mistaken. You've gone...
It's about 2 decades exactly now, because back then the elections were held a bit later. So yeah, it has been about 2 decades exactly.
So for 2 decades, you've had a hand in and your mind wrapped around shaping our city, charting a course, taking us through different economic cycles, taking us through different growth periods. We saw some incredible growth. We saw a period where there was no land for sale and therefore we slowed down. And here we are, and I'm going to throw a question into this. We had on our show not so long ago a phenomenal man, someone we respected and admire. Well, we've had Tim Hudak, who's the executive director over at Ontario Real Estate Association, but we've also had Nick Nanos on the show, and Nick is definitely savvy. I know I'm a fan of him. I think you are as well. And he basically let us know that while everything that we've been doing for the last several years was the right thing to be doing, given the information and the data that we were working with, based on the reality of where we are now with COVID and with changes in temperament and where people see themselves with working from home, et cetera, and COVID restrictions, all that is out the window and it doesn't work anymore. So he's basically suggested put on the brakes and have a relook at how we plan out our cities. What are you thinking at City Council, and what is your staff advising you?
Yeah, I think it will have an effect. Maybe not as great as some people think, but I think it will have an effect. And the timing's perfect because we're just in the middle of our public consultation for our new official plan, which basically is the document that will guide how Barrie will grow over the next 30 years. So I think it's actually very good timing. We can take COVID into consideration in a lot of the things we're doing. I think we've already seen trends towards certain things. We may not need as many offices. We may not need as many retail outlets. Things have changed. The way people shop has changed. The way people work has changed. And I think that'll all be taken into consideration in our new official plan.
Yeah. One of the things, and the focus question for today is one of the recommendations that we're hearing from Maria, Korea, and you hear it yourself too, is with the high price of homes and the widening gap between, affordability and not qualifying for purchase that we're seeing with residents. Red tape is one of the things that gets looked at often that contributes both to added costs, certainly, which always seem to get passed down to the purchaser at the end, and just the timeline that's involved in going from point A into shovels in the ground. So I'd like to talk a bit about red tape and what we may do there, but just to start with, maybe if you could give us your idea of just go over that. What is red tape? When we hear that term, what are we referring to?
Well, I'm sure a developer would see it differently than a city councillor would. I mean, it's red tape if there's unnecessary delays in the planning process. And I think certainly the provincial government's aware of that. It's recently tabled legislation to try to speed things up and clear some of that red tape. But I think it's important to remember that sometimes things we call red tape isn't necessarily a bad thing. It's a necessary part of the process. Certainly, maybe that red tape is seen as public consultation. I think in the city of Barrie, we take public consultation seriously. And sometimes people think that their public input doesn't matter. And that's because they may be opposed to a project. And because they can't stop the project, they think, well, why do you bother asking our opinion when it still goes ahead? But I've seen almost every development, developers make changes to their plans based on that public input. They may move the parking, they may change the height of the building, they may do things because the public asked for it at the public consultation stage. And the other thing about red tape is, I mean, I've just got a quick list here. I'll just run through. This is one project in the city of Barrie, the kind of documentation. This is the project that's proposed for the corner of Sophia and Bayfield. A building material study, grading plan, hydrogeological impact study, landscape plans, phase 1 environmental site assessment, phase 2 environmental site assessment, phosphorus plan, planning justification report, shadow study, topographical survey, tree inventory, traffic impact. I mean, it just goes on. That's just a touch. There's dozens and dozens of reports that every developer has to submit before submitting a plan for a subdivision or a high rise. I don't know if that's red tape. That's all part of the planning process. It's necessary to make sure that this will have minimal impact on the area and that it can be built safely. And
well, Barrie, I think I'm so glad that you did that. And I'm so glad that you if you will, rattled off that list, because with our show, we do aim to provide additional information, education, that kind of thing, share this type of insight with our audience and our viewers. And you're absolutely correct. Imagine if none of those items were on the list and open for consideration. And that is typically what people have referred to in the past as it's the Wild West out there. Anybody with the right amount of money can come in and get whatever they want done. We look at that south of the border in certain cities, that's the approach that's been taken. If there's money and there's revenue, go for it. So I'm glad that you rattled all those off. It rings a bell. When I was on council, I had, it was somewhat of a neighborhood dispute, if you will, but I got an email from a guy that said, I voted for you, therefore you're going to do what I told you to do. And I was like, yeah, but you don't realize that the other neighbor on the other side of this argument also voted for me and also sent me that email. And it's not about that. It's not about opinion. It is about the data. It is about, so as much as you're going to provide your input and your perspective on something, you are somehow attempting to anchor it to the science, the data, the law.
Yeah. Are there, even without neglecting any of those key elements that are needed to be done, all that due diligence, do you think there are efficiencies that can be found in there? I mean, when AMO gets together, the group of mayors from across the province, are there ideas that are coming for, hey, we can do this better, we can do this more efficiently? Is that anything you hear?
Mike, sorry, Barrie, you got 30 seconds on that.
And there certainly are. I mean, there's always things the city can do better. And maybe a bit later, I'll get into a recent study that was done by in the Toronto area to talk about where Barrie ranks in terms of processing applications.
Well, let's bring that back after the break.
This program is brought to you by Ignite TV. Now you're in command. Visit Rogers.com for more details.
It was really fun working with them, especially with it when it comes to the studio tour, because it lets you meet the artists again and again. I hate to say nature inspires me, because every artist has it, but it is the grasses, the flowers, the trees, mostly rocks as well. So I use grasses over and over again. Every once in a while, somebody wants to have something special. They bring me their own flowers. For me, the glaze has to be perfect, and I like I said, a lot of depth in it. And that's it. All done.
Welcome back to Hitting Home with Mike and Arif. We have as our guest Barrie Ward, who is Deputy Mayor and Councillor for Ward. Remind me again, 3?
4. Barrie Ward.
Okay.
Ward 4.
What's in a number?
It's
Unless
the
you're
best,
campaigning.
best hashtag out there. Are you kidding me? It's great.
So you were saying just before we went to the break, and I'd asked you a question, didn't leave you much time to answer. You made reference to a study you wanted to elaborate on. Tell us a bit about that.
Yeah, BUILD, which is the developers landowners group. It's the Building Industry and Land Development BUILD Association. Had Altus Group, which is a third party, do a study of all the Toronto area municipalities to find out who was the best at processing building applications. And they looked at things. I mean, they looked at several things, but the main points were transparency. In other words, was everything the city doing open, and could developers follow it along? Tracking, which was important. The developers, do they always know where they stand in the process? Like they're not left in the dark wondering, is our application being dealt with, or what do we need to do?
Yeah.
And the last one was charges and fees, which is obviously planning pays for itself. We charged the developers the amount that it costs to process that, so it's not put on the burden of taxpayers. Barrie came out tops in the Toronto area. We were the best municipality in the Toronto area for processing building applications. I mean, that's quite a feather in our cap. It doesn't mean we're fast. It takes about a year. I know staff usually estimates about a year. If somebody puts in a proposal for, let's say, a new subdivision, it takes about a year from then to when it's approved, with all the public meetings, the processing the applications, etc. But that's actually the best record in the Toronto area for processing.
That's
so
impressive.
I think it's incredible news.
Now, when there are challenges to a proposal, and the city does decide they may be challenges that the city itself brings forward, and they decide not to approve, often we'll see the next option is to go to the Ontario Municipal Board. How does that typically work?
Well, and actually, if you don't mind, Barrie, I want to jump in there real quick, because it's now gone over to the land planning. What do they call it? LPAT.
LPAT.
And I'm glad that you brought that up, Mike, because I just was reading an article in the paper that said basically, well, I mean, COVID hasn't helped anything, and we all know that, but there's been scrutiny around how effective or how accessible this new tribunal or this new protocol is, and what's your experience with that? So thanks for the question, Mike.
Yeah, I mean, anybody can bring it out. At first of all, even on there's deadlines set up by the province. I don't have them in front of me, but we have to process applications within a certain length of time. And even developers can even appeal that. If we don't do it within, let's say, 60 days or the deadline is, they can take it to the LPAT that we haven't approved it in time. There's all kinds of reasons they can. Residents can take something to LPAT, which is new Ontario Municipal Board. It doesn't happen very often. And usually it works out. I mean, councillors know there's always that appeal process out there. I think we know that we're making a decision. We know, we can't just say no to a project, because if the land is owned residential and somebody wants to put homes there, it's going to go there. There's no use saying no, because it'll be headed to LPAT. And not only we'll have our own staff testifying against this, because our staff recommends that a development go ahead. And we've done it at least twice when I've been on council. We've had to go and find a planner out there that's willing to take our stand. But at that LPAT hearing, our own staff will be testifying against the city of Barrie. So, we know that. And I think the developers know that too. Everybody knows that we have to right to compromise, because nobody wants the cost and the time delay of going to LPAT. So I think that's always over everybody's heads, that we know this. We know there's a possibility of appeal out there. Let's try to work on a compromise and get it approved on this. Both sides realize.
I want to bring this back around a little bit more to the residential side, a little bit away from the development side, simply because certainly the taxpayer and the voters are the ones who they want to talk about something, or they want to learn about something that they actually care about, not so much the business of it, but how is planning and zoning and building actually impacting our lives as residents, as taxpayers, our housing prices, et cetera. And you talk about the fact that it typically takes about a year to go through the process. Here's the interesting thing. The shovels in the ground that we may see starting anytime now are from plans from at minimum a year ago, and probably pre-planning, maybe for 2 or 3 years before that. So now with COVID and with these changes, here's something that we can't deny. Prices are higher than they've ever been. Accessibility to inventory is lower than it's ever been, certainly on the new build side still. And then you add, outside of natural migration trends to and from the GTA or elsewhere, you add to the fact that more than ever, people are leaving the GTA for safe havens like Barrie. And we still don't have the inventory, and you cannot turn the industry on a dime the way the trends have changed in the last 6 months. What is the city doing with the development community to either fast track or to curb or to alleviate the ever increasing home prices due to this new demand or this new pressure on demand?
I think in general, time is money for developers. So the fact that we're approving them fairly quickly and efficiently means the price, it's directly related to the affordability. I mean, affordability being a relative term in Barrie these days, but it does. So the fact is we're dealing with this quickly. I think, you mentioned COVID impact. It's an interesting question because a couple of months ago, the mayor and I divided up all the developments that were stalled in Barrie. I mean, one of the most frustrating things as a city councilor is to see all these developments approved and then nothing happens. The land just sits there. So we decided to call up some of the developers to find out what was going on. And the ones that are behind seniors residents, COVID was a factor. I mean, they were looking at their plans again in light of COVID, not because the demand wasn't going to be there, but because maybe the design had to be different. If you're building a retirement residence these days, the rules have changed on you. Things have changed. For example, in my own ward, I've got seniors' homes, and the old way was you build a home, and if it was really hot, you had air-conditioned central areas people could gather in. Well, that's not possible under COVID, especially among seniors. You do not want seniors all gathering in the same room. So that's the kind of thing that I think that COVID has had an effect. And I'm sure the city staff will work with developers to try to adjust some of those plans they already have that have already been approved to face the realities of our COVID era.
I'd like to ask you, now we've talked about, bigger projects and, the application process and all the processes to get something built as they apply to these bigger projects. But a lot of people now, partly because of COVID, partly just because of the price of homes, are planning to stay longer in their home. And maybe if there's certainly equity in their home, which is affording them the ability to improve on their home. Then there's also people who maybe their only option to buy a home is to put that second suite into the home to offset some of the costs. So a lot of building is taking place, a lot of approvals being needed just for those individual homeowners. So maybe you can tell us how this process applies to those individual homeowners for anyone who may be watching and considering, putting in a basement apartment or maybe an extension on the back or a second floor over the garage.
So Barrie, not that you need it, and I'm doing this to you again, all right? I'm going to give you 30 seconds to gather your thoughts, and we're going to go to break real quick, but I think it's a great question. I look forward to hearing the answer right after this break on Hitting Home with Mike and Arif on Rogers TV Barrie.
What kind of show do you want to see on Rogers TV? What interests you? Log on to rogerstv.com, fill out a show proposal, and tell us about your segment idea. We want to know what you want to see. Rogers TV, only on Rogers.
Hey, did you know?
More than 4,500 Canadians are waiting for an organ transplant right now.
Right now. 4,500.
People are dying.
And you could save a life. 90% of Canadians say they're willing to donate their organs.
But only a few are registered.
So what are you waiting for? Get registered.
It's easy and it's free.
Leave a legacy. Be a hero.
Save a life.
Find out how to register today. Go to kidney.ca.
Do you have something to share? Let everyone know about your next meeting, your need for volunteers, or your fundraising event on the Rogers TV Community Billboard. Send us your words and we'll bring them to life on Rogers TV and rogerstv.com. When it's time to spread the word, go to rogerstv.com to add your announcement to the community billboard.
After involving Nuha in this program, she feels very confident. Here you have a lot of opportunity.
I learned a lot of stuff, like being kind and I'm more open-minded.
Welcome back to Hitting Home with Mike and Arif on Rogers TV Barrie, and we're thrilled to have you here Deputy Mayor Barrie Ward for Ward 4. I'll throw you that shameless plug in there. And just before the break, we were talking about really residents and their ability to, well, one, that they're staying longer, but the ability to adapt their home with a second suite or whatever. And really one thing while I was still on council, and tell me, are you still utilizing it, that I think staff and council and residents found very useful was a pre-consultation. It doesn't matter what the type of project it was. Maybe you can take us through a little bit of that.
Sure. Certainly pre-consultation is very, very important for large developments. I mean, it's important for everybody, but large developments, you know, staff is always encouraging developers to come in with pre-consultation, find out what their zoning is, find out what are they required. We talked about red tape earlier, and I remember going to a presentation at one of the municipal conferences a few years ago, and it said what often looks like red tape is because the developer has not filled out the forms properly. Municipal staff gets very frustrated by it. They'll require these forms and then they won't come in, or they won't be signed, or they won't be dated, or something will be left out, or a report will be left out, and they have to go back. And the developer says, all this red tape is killing me. Well, it's not red tape. If they had just gone to a pre-consultation, found out what they needed before they started the process. That applies to homeowners too. I mean, there's certainly a lot of people. I was at an online call the other day, and somebody from the Barrie District Real Estate Association called the amount of investment in Barrie staggering. The amount of money that's being put into Barrie right now from outside the municipality. I think a lot of those people are probably, my guess is they're looking at adding second suites or granny flats. And I'll point out that since last year, the province amended the legislation. Barrie, by law, has to allow people to build not only a second suite in their home, but a granny flat, which means 3 units on what used to be a single family home. There's been a substantial number of them, even in my own ward, because people often say, something going on next door. And I'll say, yeah, it's a granny flat going in. They'll say, well, it's already got a second suite. And I say, yep, they're all allowed. Everybody in Barrie can build 3 units on their property these days.
Wow. And that's so that you get the U-Haul truck with that thing over the cab where it's like grand, right? That's how that works.
So now what are the stipulations there? Does it have to be a family member living in that third unit? Or
nope, it can be anybody. And there's a lot of them going up. I know from talking to other councillors, a lot going up. But just going back to pre-consultation, I think it's important before people make an investment in a home to think, oh, I'm going to turn it into a second suite, or I'm going to build a. I mean, make sure you meet them, because there are requirements. You can't just build them. You have to have property setbacks. I mean, I think of the example in my own ward. Quite a few years ago, somebody wanted to put in a secondary suite, and they found out their basement ceiling was half an inch too short for what the requirements are. Now, you can't get around that. I mean, you could spend, I don't know how much money it would cost you to raise your house by half an inch or lower your basement by half an inch, but the cost you'd never recover it. So I think it's very important that people go to staff, find out, can I get a second suite in this house? Before I even go any further, can I? Certainly don't buy a house and plan to put in a second suite if you haven't checked the cost. Even granny flats, for example, in your backyard, you have to have a separate water line. That's expensive, probably $10,000 put in a separate water line. Make sure you know those things before you invest in a property thinking you're going to be doing all these things.
Oh, good points. And one other that I think people overlook, I guess it's 2 others, and with regards to that lower level second suite, is that separate entrance. And if you've got to dig down and put in a separate entrance because the house doesn't already come with one, that's a big expense, as well as the size of your windows in your bedrooms. If they're not, if you've got to
do it.
Yeah. And if you can, even if you can, that cost is significant. So these are things, talking to City Hall and learning beforehand, before you go and invest, it's very good advice.
Well, I think that if you look...
City Hall is still closed these days, except for by appointment. So unfortunately, you have to make an appointment to see anybody.
So you bring up two good things. I'm glad you brought that up, Barrie. Definitely make an appointment. Staff is available, but certainly pre-COVID, getting the information and knowing all these things that you just mentioned would be excellent guidance to begin with. But you're advising the city is working diligently to get information available online or virtual meetings or whatever it may be. And there is access to City Hall.
Yes, and if we're putting more and more online these days, certainly the planning department is one of the departments that's been working very hard to get all their things online. I mean, you can find out about what developments are going on in the city of Barrie. You can see the planning documents. You can see what you need to do a second suite. All that is online.
Yes, so let's segue.
I just want to get this one question in real quick, and that is, Mike, back to you. 18 months ago or so, the average home price in Barrie was around $450,000, something like that. Today, Mike, if I heard correctly, it's in the low 6s for an average price of a home in Barrie.
This week, I'm not 100% sure. It's up there, though. It's encroaching on 600 if it's not, hasn't hit it yet for an average detached 3-bedroom home.
I was thinking it was in the low 600s. And so, Barrie, you mentioned
it may well be at this point.
And we get this a fair amount. I get this a fair amount on social media, or people reaching out to us either because of a show that they've watched. And the question is, by whose standard are we using this term affordable? And you were referring to a project or a development in the downtown Sophia, I believe you said, and Bayfield. And the question is, what is affordable? And then we talk about granny flats and second suites and what is affordable. The bottom line is, Mike, you put out an article or a post earlier this week that said, no matter what, adding inventory will help with the affordability.
Yeah. If not directly, indirectly, more units means more competition, and it stabilizes prices.
So for people who are curious about whether they like the idea of a granny flat or an in-law suite going in next door, it's all towards helping with affordability. But Barrie, you touched on earlier, we just have a moment about the projects that had stalled until recently. Can you give us a brief summary on what else is going on and what we can look forward to?
I think it's encouraging that I think there's at least 4 cranes in the sky right now as we speak, and they're kind of spread out throughout Barrie, which is a sign that there are projects going ahead. And some of them are rental, which is a very good sign. For example, there's one in my ward just behind Paul Sadler Motors, a 10 or 12-story building going in. That's apartments. I don't know whether they'll meet the guideline for affordable, but they are apartments, rental units, which is very important because every time one is built, that means there's an apartment opened up somewhere else, or at least takes the pressure off of it, because we have a very low vacancy rate still. So I think that's very important that we get those. So those ones, so something's going ahead. It's still frustrating that so few of the projects are going ahead downtown. I know that when the mayor and I talked to them, they all seem to claim they're planning to build them still. I'm not sure. Maybe they're waiting for the sales to reach a certain point. I think that we talked about the affordable one at the corner of Sophia and Bayfield. That one will go ahead. That's a Coral Group. It's already owns a nonprofit across the road. It's got the money. It'll go ahead. A lot of the other ones, which are condos, depend on pre-sales, and I have no idea how those are going. I've been waiting to see the Lack House start, and that'll be a good.
That is going to be something. We got 30 seconds. We got to go. I'm just curious, in your estimation, any hint on whether or not developers are looking for incentives from CMHC insurance to subsidize some of their projects for affordability? 20 seconds.
Well, it's going to take, I don't know. So it's going to take even less than that. I have no idea. I think that, with our booming market in Barrie, I imagine a lot of these projects go ahead. We even talked about the annex lands. Those should come in fully online this year. We should see a lot of development in the annex lands.
I guess we got to get into your calendar in the next week or two and have you back for that discussion. I want to thank you very much, Deputy Barrie Ward, Deputy Mayor of City of Barrie. Thanks for your service for the last couple of decades. Always a pleasure to see you, and we look forward to seeing you again on Hitting Home.